Hello again. This is Pastor Don Phillips of Don and Carol Phillips Ministries in Kansas City. Glad you tuned in today. I'm bringing you a little different message than I have the last couple of weeks because if you remember, if you've been catching my sermon presentations for the past couple of weeks, you'll remember that about 2 weeks ago I delivered a message on let God do something new in your life. And then I urged you last week to come to Jesus so that he could wipe out your past and give you a brand new start. I also urge you that once Jesus does that for you, that you never look back to your past. Well, today, my aim is to urge you to turn to Jesus and let him help you overcome the giant of discouragement in your life. In fact, that's the title of the sermon, Slaying the Giant of Discouragement in Your Life. And I'm going to read some verses to you from Nehemiah 4. I'm beginning at verse 10, going to 14, and I will come back and deal with these verses just about on a one-by-one basis after a while. But they read, Then Judah said, the strength of the laborers is failing, and there is so much rubbish that we're not able to build the wall. And our adversaries said they will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. So it was when the Jews who dwelt near them came that they told us 10 times, from whatever place you turn, they will be upon us. Therefore, I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings, and I set the people according to their families with their swords, with their spears, with their bows. And I looked and I arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Now, I want to tell you, I know today that we all face discouragement at times, and it's not a fun thing. But Satan, that enemy of ours who goes about as a roaring lion trying to devour us, specializes in discouraging God's people. His vile tactics are more difficult for some than it is for others. But what exactly are the limits of human tolerance? What are the limits of measurement for pain and discouragement? And how does your discouragement threshold differ from mine? Well, I have to tell you, I don't know the answer to those questions, but I can tell you that the human spirit is an amazing thing. Now, the dictionary defines discourage as to deprive of courage, to deter, to dishearten, or to hinder. And if you notice, I think all of those words, except hinder, started with a D. And you can throw in on top of that doom and depression and defeat and despair. Our mind tends to dwell on these words when life has us pinned down. And pinned down describes exactly how some of you hearing this message to me today feel right now. You feel pinned down. You feel like you've failed. You feel like whatever you try fails, and you just don't feel like trying anymore. That means you're pinned down. The devil has you pinned down. The New Testament comes from the Greek, and there are 3 words that carry the idea of being discouraged or disheartened or dispirited. And notice some more D words there. These 3 words are variously translated in the New Testament as to faint or to grow weary. For instance, in 2 Corinthians 4:1, the Apostle Paul said, Therefore, since we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we do not lose heart. In 2 Corinthians 4:16, just a few verses later, he said, Therefore we do not lose heart, even though our outward man is perishing, yet the inward man is being renewed day by day. In Luke 18:1, the Bible says, Then he spoke a parable to them that men always ought to pray and not to lose heart. Some translations say, not to faint. Well, from the book of Nehemiah, we learn a lesson about the renovation of hope from the rubble of discouragement. And some of you listening to me today are in the rubble of discouragement. You really don't know what to do. You don't know which way to turn. You're not sure what your next move should be. I'm talking to you today. This following events that I'm going to talk about happened during the darkest days of Israel's history, Israel and Judah, when the invaders rolled into their towns, even Jerusalem. And the Babylonians pretty well destroyed the holy city of Jerusalem, looting its glories and carrying away its people to enslavement in a distant land. On the surface, it appeared that God's people had lost it all. They'd lost their homeland, they'd lost their pride, they'd lost their very identity as a nation, set apart for God's special destiny. So for now, God's people were dispersed across the nations, and it was a very, shall I say, discouraging time, or a time when discouragement was probably natural. Well, these are truly dark times. There were days of lamentation and weeping and silence, and sometimes they were just at a loss as to what to do. But after 70 years, some of them were allowed to return to Jerusalem in order to rebuild their temple. Among those returning were Ezra the priest and Nehemiah an administrator. Ironically, both of these men have a book in the Old Testament that bears their name. Ezra has been called the priest to broken hearts, and Nehemiah the builder of broken dreams. And the reason he's called that is because what he set in order here to get the walls of the city of Jerusalem rebuilt. From the book of Nehemiah, we can learn about the renovation of hope from that rubble of discouragement, because with their walls lying in ruins, the people of Israel hadn't had a peaceful night of sleep in a long time. And then even those who came back to the area, raiders from outlying provinces, had been able to attack at night and keep the Israelites discouraged. The threat of a Jewish return was an unwelcome one to these outlying areas. They didn't care whether they didn't want them to come back. The returning Israelites were under attack from every side, and the greatest weapons in the Israel of his enemies were fear and discouragement. And I want to tell you, that's the devil's greatest tool today. In this 4th chapter of Nehemiah, they were halfway through their project of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. At this halfway point, a fresh wave of discouragement breaks out, and Nehemiah has to deal with this discouragement, and the way he did it will still work today. It'll work for you. So we've talked about what is discouragement, but let me say I want to deal now with at least 4 factors of discouragement. And the first one I want to deal with is fatigue. Do you ever feel fatigued? Vince Lombardi got it right when he said fatigue makes cowards of all of us. Israel observed the same thing, but Nehemiah put it in this way: the strength of the laborers is failing. After 52 days of back-breaking labor, fatigue was catching up to them. And when energy runs short, so does courage. The devil's business is to wear out the saints of the Most High God. And I want to tell you, in many cases, in many places around this country of ours today, he's doing a great job, and the people of God, many are becoming discouraged. I don't want that to happen to you. Factor number 2 I want to talk about is frustration. Judah's workers were not only weary and discouraged, they were frustrated. Judah looked around himself and said, there's so much rubbish, we're not able to build the walls. Can you imagine you're trying to build some high rock walls and you've just got broken rocks and all kinds of stuff laying in your way? They could no longer see the proud, gleaming walls of their dreams. Visions of glory seemed like a mirage in the desert to them there. There was nothing to see but broken bricks and mud and debris. These folks were experiencing burnout. Well, let me tell you, you can live out a situation, you can wear out in a situation, or you can burn out in a situation. But to burn out doesn't mean you work too hard. The true meaning of burnout is working too hard at too many things. It's striving for a goal that you can't accomplish. It's a feeling of despondency and loss of courage. The third factor in discouragement is failure, and we all realize that. Judah's report to headquarters went like this: the strength of the laborers is failing, and there's so much rubbish that we're not able to build the wall. Fatigue and frustration are a good recipe for failure. So today, if you're experiencing fatigue and frustration, I want to tell you that's, if you're not careful, you'll fail. But when we are tired and fed up, I want to say we just cannot do this. Let me tell you something else. Let me warn you about it. Negative talk is infectious. It spreads like a virus to infect the whole community, everybody around you. The more negative we give them, the more negative talk we put out, the more everybody else will become discouraged and despondent. It's just infectious. Failure is universal. What makes the difference is how we handle failure. When things go wrong, when we're more apt to give an ear to the enemy than any other time, that's failure. And I want to tell you, he's talking into your ear night and day. He never lets up. So you'll always have him there. And that causes discouragement, and it causes the fatigue, and it also causes fear. Think of that. Israel's workers were quick to admit their fear and to explain the reasons for it. For instance, in verses 11 and 12, they said, our adversaries have said, they will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. How would you like to have that pasted on your front sidewalk? So it was when the Jews who dwelt near them came that they told us 10 times, from whatever place you turn, they will be upon us. I want to tell you, that sounds like a fearful message to me. They were telling them, there's nothing you can do about it. We're going to be in control here. You're going to lose this time. But so let me deal now with a little bit of what is the best way to deal with discouragement? Well, there's 3 or 4 reasons I want to talk about here. And the first reason, the first response I think we have is to cry out to God. Listen to verse 4 and 5 of that chapter of Nehemiah. Hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn the reproach upon their own heads and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity, and do not let their sin be blotted out before you. For they have provoked you to anger before the builders. Then in verse 9, nevertheless, we made our prayer to our God, and because of them we set a watch against them day and night. In other words, they set guards up for these outlying people who might be coming in the middle of the night. And someone might ask, well, if they prayed, why did they also need to set a watch? Didn't Jesus advise us? Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. How often do we cry out to God last instead of first? No, they cried out to God first. They said, God, here's the mess we're in. Here's the trouble we're having. We need some help here. Now, they say they're going to come in. We're going to set guards against them, but we need your help. So the next response after you cry out to God, and I'd say do that the first thing. Continue the work that God has given you to do. And you say, I was doing it and nothing was going right. It was just all falling apart. Well, just keep on doing it. Just keep building that wall, so to speak. And so we read in chapter 4 of Nehemiah, verse 6, so we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. Why was that built? Because the people had a mind to work. They wouldn't give up. They got discouraged. They got fearful, yes, but they never gave up. They just kept working. You have to do the same thing, and I have to do the same thing. Then in chapter 6, verse 1 to 2, Nehemiah wrote, now it happened when the rest of the enemies heard that I had built the wall and that there were no breaks left in it, though at that time I had not hung the doors and the gates, that Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, Come, let us meet together among the villages in the palm of Oma. But they thought to do me harm. You know, the times we feel like quitting are the times we must do our best to keep holding on. Let me say that again. I want you to listen to me. The time you feel most like quitting are the times you have to do your best to keep holding on. And so they told Nehemiah, okay, if we can't stop the work up there, why don't you just come down and let's sit around and have a cup of coffee down here at the coffee house here in town, and we'll get this all figured out. Nehemiah was smarter than that. He said, I knew they thought to kill me. So he revealed one of his actions in chapter 6, verse 3, some of his actions in that time of great distress. So I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go have a cup of coffee with you or come down to you, is what he said. You see, he knew that God wanted the wall built, that's why he had been allowed to come back to his own country. And it was necessary that they get these walls built so that more of the people could come back. So he just realized that, yes, I have a job to do. And yes, it's discouraging, but you gave me a work to do, so I just have to keep on doing it. So he asked his enemies, why in the world should I give up even a couple of hours to come down and be with you? I could be building here during that 2 hours. The third response I want to tell you is concentrate on the big picture. Nehemiah turned his eyes upward to the big picture. Let me read to you what he said in Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 13 to 14. Therefore, I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings, and I set the people according to their families with their swords, their spears, their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome. Let me repeat that again. Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, for your sons, for your daughters, for your wives, and for your houses. How many times we forget how great and awesome our God is because we're so busy concentrating on the problem. That's what we do most of the time. No, get your eyes off the problem and remember that you serve a God that is great and awesome, and then stay in the fight. The fourth response, claim the encouragement of God's promises. Let's take another look at that 14th verse. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, for your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. I want to tell you, there may be times when you, like David, have to encourage yourself in the Lord. David said that. He said, I encouraged myself in the Lord. You don't have to be afraid of them, whoever they are. You don't have to be afraid. Remember the Lord that you serve is great and awesome, and fight. Get back in the fight. Psalms 46, 1-3 says, God is our refuge and strength, a present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, even though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though its waters roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with its swelling. Selah. Oh, he is our strength and our refuge. He's a very present help in time of trouble. Let's also look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 3:13. But as for you, brethren, this is what the Apostle Paul said, do not grow weary in doing good. Can't do it. I know the devil is discouraging you. I know he's working on you. He's whispering to your ear all night, keeping you awake sometime, telling you about how your world's falling apart, what a mistake you have made and what a failure you are. I know those things happen, and I have a feeling that's happening to some of the people that are listening to me right now. But Paul said, As for you, brethren, don't grow weary in doing good. If you're doing good, keep on. Next, let's look at Galatians 6 and 9. And let us not grow weary while doing good. For in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Our fifth response is carry someone else's burden. If we read just a little bit further in that fourth chapter, we'll find a band of stragglers, the remnant of fallen Israel, who had bonded together to become a team. Some were carrying loads, some were guarding, some were building, but all of them were wearing swords, and they were in unity. I want to tell you, the Bible says that while they were laying these stones, they had their swords in their hand. They were ready to fight. You want to fight? Come on, I'll fight. But we're going to build this wall. That's the attitude you and I have. We've got to have it in this day in which we live. They were in unity. And you know what people say? United we stand. Divided we fall. Stand with God. Discouragement tends to lead us off from the ones we need. But the best way for you to be encouraged is to find someone else and encourage them. Find someone else that's discouraged and encourage them. Give them these words from the scripture. Be not weary in well-doing. For in due season we're going to reap. We're not reaping right now. The devil's fighting against us and we're fighting back and we're in a battle. But if we don't give up, we're going to win. And this battle will soon be over. God bless you. Listen again next week.